hello, hi, friends and relatives. Welcome to the premiere episode of The Glorious Mess, the place where I get messy gloriously. I can't think of a better way to start off a premiere episode. And it's very timely that this premiere episode is happening and what we're talking about, because not only am I going through something at the moment, it's also on topic with what we're talking about. So today we're going to be talking all things relationships and attachment styles and looking at my journey to learn and unlearn. And I've got my dear friend Courtney Napper here, who's also going to share her beautiful, exciting lived experience and stories. I will just say disclaimer, we are not entering this conversation as professionals. Please, if you need to get any additional supports, seek them out. There's always a counseling center in your city. There's always a ton of amazing resources, which I'll put in the description as well. I always tell people I don't do trigger warnings, and not because I'm against trigger warnings, but the idea that our triggers are always evolving, and I learn new things about my triggers every day. So I can't say that this will be a triggerless space, but I can say that I hope that you have your coping mechanisms, whatever you need to help you self-regulate. If some of the content, if ever, is triggering or activating for you, you have the control and the power to just turn this shit right off.
I love
So
that. I
I'm
love you always have your
go
own spin on things. I love it. It's like
ahead.
you're educated and then you take what you learn from it and then you make it your own. And I love that.
110%. And we're meant to be feelings beings. We're meant to feel things. We're meant to feel the whole range of spectrum of emotions. And that's like the beauty of being human. And sometimes they suck like a lot, but they are always temporary. And I think that gives me a little bit of joy. So that's the start and our intro for today's episode. Courtney, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It feels like a natural extension of our text conversation. So
100%. And now, so for background, for anyone who's listening, Courtney and I have technically known each other through social media for years. And we recently discovered that you took a class that I would say is probably one of my shittiest choreography pieces of work to date. But, you did make it look good. So props to
it brought
you.
me so much joy. Like it was my first class back into dancing and you just created such a like fun space. So I didn't notice what you would call shitty choreo.
And that's true for me too. When I look back on it now, I'm hypercritical, but in the moment, I was just excited because I remember hearing this song and creating something in my mind as I was walking. And so to be able to bring that to life, and I remember seeing you in that kind of select group, it was really like validating in the moment. So like it's like when we look back when you're like 14 and you're like, wow, we thought we were so hot then. And then you realize like, oh my God, you just had so much like foundation on.
I used to put like this green stuff all over my face because I had acne and I would like use this green stuff to try to offset the red pigmentation, but it was like not a good look. Not a good look.
Oh my God. I'll have to get those photos. And yeah, so that to say, but then Courtney and I were both in Toronto. We were both with the same agency. And then we are like always making plans to hang out. And then finally we hung out and we're like, wow, we get along great. We are divinely connected by our beautiful, glorious, messy selves. And just kidding, I'm moving to Montreal. Bye.
Just kidding. My anxious side of my attachment style was like, don't go.
Right? But here we are. We're connecting virtually. And I think it's such a like great premiere episode because like this comes from an author. Have you ever heard of Maston Kipp?
I have heard the name, but I haven't read them.
He used to write this thing called The Daily Love, and it was like when I was 20. And he's definitely like evolved into many spheres and spaces. But one thing he said once was relationships are growth containers. And I think that's always stuck with me. And so I think the reality is like today we'll be talking more on like romantic relationships, but I think some of these lessons and ideas like we have relationships everywhere. Like we're
Yeah.
so interconnected. Like we literally, I started thinking actually on the metro the other day. I was like, wow, I'm in relationship with these people on the metro. Like not something that I
Yeah.
think we like think of, but like really in this moment, we are sharing space and like we are experiencing the exact same thing. And I'm like, wow, this is a relationship. And then I remember I'm anxious. I hate the metro. So then I'm like, oh,
Oh,
God,
yeah.
get me off.
You've got to be at the front or the back. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Okay, but see, this is the thing. So in Toronto, anyone who is listening and knows the Toronto subway, you do not have any service under there. They stop as they want and they don't necessarily communicate to you, which a good thing. I need communication. I value communication in my relationships. But in Montreal, you do have service the whole time, and they're way faster. So I don't actually feel as wild in those ones. But Toronto TTC, if I never take it again, I will be totally happy never again.
It's like you made the right choice to move to Montreal.
Right? Everything is aligning. But I was thinking too, like when we talk about relationships, like we're really meaning just any engagement you have with someone beyond yourself. But at the same time, you do also have like a relationship to self. And that was framed by so many things from childhood to every single interaction I think that we have is influenced us and it kind of got us to where we are. And when I was thinking of romantic relationships, I remember my earlier relationships and arguably my current relationship sometimes, but is like they were always quite dramatic. Like
Yeah.
everything was dramatic. Like it wasn't just like a fight, it was like things are thrown and phone is thrown and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like, woe is me, so dramatic. And then I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, what were my favorite shows growing up? Like was like The Real World
Oh my
or
God.
like Jersey Shore. Like and so my whole concept of relationship was so heavily inspired by media.
Oh my gosh. Meanwhile, I love how you're saying like Jersey Shore. Mine was like Full House, like Danny Tanner and Uncle Jesse and Uncle Joey.
So yours was wholesome.
Yeah, it was in terms of the media sense, but I mean, there's like a whole other realm of like problems with the stuff we grew up on. But yeah, I guess compared to Jersey Shore, mine was probably actually like created maybe even like a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I feel like in some ways yours was like kind of more real because it was showing the breadth of all the emotional aspects of relationships where mine was a
Mhm.
little bit more like contained and safe and like G-rated.
And well, I guess then how did it play out in your earlier relationships? Were your relationships wholesome and safe spaces?
No, if anything, it made me feel like, oh my gosh, I am like a wild woman over here in my relationships. Like Danny Tanner had it like pretty together. Meanwhile, I'm just like going off the rails. So
Right. And I was gonna say, yeah, and to note that we are both obviously in relationship now, which we get to talk about to each other often, and some of the creativity that is beautiful for our careers, but has elevated in our minds to sometimes create scenarios and questions and yeah, which we'll get into that. We'll get into that. But I think too, like dating in the like modern times, like it's kind of this like I'm kind of glad that I'm in a relationship because like casual dating is fucking hard nowadays.
honestly, I haven't even done that much casual dating, which like I think that's like a whole other like probably red flag in itself. I feel like I'm either like super single and like there's nobody infiltrating my space or I'm in a
Yeah.
relationship. Like I haven't done a lot of the dabbling.
Mhm.
So
So you haven't been traumatized by it?
I mean, I think maybe the little bits that I've done, I'm like, yeah, no. no, not for me. But like there's so much space to learn from casual
Mhm.
dating, and a
Mhm.
part of me feels like I really would like have benefited from doing that. You learn so much about yourself by relationship with other people, and I feel like intimate relationships just, you know, um catalyze the growth because it's like so in your face, it's so
Mhm.
so
And it's so, I think it's so vulnerable. Like
yeah.
there's something deeply vulnerable about romantic relationships that like really bring out the ugly. And I think of like Marilyn Monroe's on the wall watching me, but like if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best is like a true testament to how we play with relationship to see if deep down we're even feeling worthy ourselves, right? And that's coming back to like the relationship of self. Like we test the waters continuously, but when we pull the layers back, I think for me, I'm like, oh, wait, am I just trying to prove that I'm lovable? Like, and so how do I love myself too within the context of the relationship, right?
Mm,
It's it's muddy, it's nuanced, and like the title of this podcast is gloriously messy.
sure is.
And I think like for me, so I know we were talking just before we started recording today about like family and how that shows. So take us into how like because you have both parents, right?
Yes, I have
Have
both
both your
parents. Both parents are still together.
yeah.
They have been together since they were 14. So they like saw each other through puberty. They've literally seen each other at almost every phase of their lives, which, I feel like people have always said to me like, "Oh, that's so cute. That's such a like nice love story, whatever." And like, now as an adult, like I can see the lovely parts of it, like at the end of their life, like they've really been like side by side, fighting their way through it the whole time.
Mhm.
But I am very aware of like how them being together since they were 14 might have um maybe like stinted them learning like maybe some communication tools,
Mhm.
or they didn't really experience life separately or like have these experiences with different people. So I
Mhm.
feel like it's impacted my relationship style and like maybe my fear of like commitment, because I
Mhm.
see relationships through the struggles that I saw them have. And every
Mhm.
relationship has its struggles, and I'm
Mhm.
not saying that like I think it's so beautiful to have a high school sweetheart. I'm just saying like in my experience with them, it's like it made me see a committed long-term relationship in a certain way, and it will
Mhm.
like kind of creep in sometimes and be like like commitment. So yeah, we can hop into that a bit more, but what about you? What was your familial kind of relationship cycle like, and yeah, how has it impacted you today?
Messy. Just that like and first thank you for sharing too. And I'm really curious too to like look at like how your parents shifted at a time where now everything is so accessible and there's so many options for everything, whereas they would have grown up at a time where it was like we're the only option, right? Like they didn't have these apps, right? So it's
Yeah.
like interesting to explore commitment through their lens. And I think in my world, like, so when I was growing up, obviously, like, until I was 10, before I went into foster care, my mom, bless her heart, I know she's listening to this, like, she liked men and she loved, and there were some amazing, amazing men, but they came and went intermittently. So there was no, like, real consistency there. Um, it was always kind of like, oh, here's the new one. And there was one I always say that like stood out the most, who was like, I would say is like my most stable father figure for those early years. But even him, then one night in the middle of the night, we like left in a dramatic leave back to Calgary. And so I think for me, relationships, because I am queer and I do date predominantly biological males, I see like how that shows up of like this fear of like, oh, it's something, it's going to end, so I need to end it. And whether that looks like me self-sabotaging, or like the discomfort of like general insecurity of like, oh my God, this could end, like the fear of it could end. And the reality is everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end, whether we see that in this lifetime or however that looks, but everything does have a go through a cycle. And I'd argue relationships kind of continuously go through these cycles of great periods and lulls. And I think what matters really is that commitment piece. And I think that's always something that's quite fragile for me, just because people just come in, as I did to you. We became so close. I just left you in Toronto. So
Um,
yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, what you said about the cycle of relationships too, I think is really
Mhm,
important. Like,
mhm,
I think, when I've had relationships end, I'll have
mhm,
friends maybe that are more in the mindset of like relationship is forever, be like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm so sorry." And it's like this like devastating thing. And I think we need to normalize the fact that like not every relationship is meant to last, forever and ever. Like,
mhm.
as you were saying, relationships are, what do you say, growth containers?
Growth containers,
Growth
masthead. Let's give
container.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so, like, some of them are meant to be a growth container that, lasts a week or a
Mhm,
month or maybe a year or whatever. But I think, like, the end of relationship doesn't have to be this devastating thing. And I do think that that's
mhm,
something that, at least in the media that I grew up with, and obviously
mhm.
with my parents as a long-term example, it felt like if you weren't in it to like, you know, until the grave, like it was a huge failure, which is
Yeah.
I'm now seeing not I don't believe that at all. So,
Mhm. And that's like when we look, I mean, we can't get too deep into this because it's a whole other topic, but like that's how like this kind of capitalist world was kind of built in the Christian roots of like, and no, if you divorce, it's a sin, it's bad. And then you see that in law, like to go through a divorce from the legal perspective is hell. I
mhm.
know because I've had 0 divorces, but I've seen friends and people go through it, and it's tumultuous, it's messy, and it's wild, but it's something I think it's like heavily rooted in. And I think that's why I always come back to like, I think there's just like indigenous teachings and holistic teachings of things kind of going through that cyclical flow, just as our earth literally goes through that cyclical flow. Although yesterday morning I was like, maybe the earth is flat. I don't know why I was spiraling. Another story. But
That's
I
for
think we
another podcast.
right. But I think we both can agree, like, the idea of attachment theory has been like something that's very of value to help begin to dive deeper into who am I in relationship, and almost like who do I want to be, or how can I proceed kind of from my authentic place rather than my like hurt, damaged inner child. And so I am no expert on attachment theory. And I am reading right directly from the webpage as we speak. But if you have heard of attachment theory, there is a psychologist had basically framed that in those early years of your childhood, um, and your relationship to your caregivers, it shapes how you show up in your adult relationship. And so in those, there's 4 different types of attachment. So there's the anxious or preoccupied, there's the avoidant or dismissive, there's the disorganized or fearful avoidant, and then there's secure. I don't know about you, but every time I read about fucking attachment style, everyone is like praises secure. But you know what? I think secure is boring, but also I think I need it. Maybe I'm just jealous.
I
Maybe I'm
think
just jealous that I'm not secure.
I think the two of us are a bit chaotic, so that's why we think secure is boring. But yes, honestly, and
Yeah.
like we'll get into more details about this, but like I feel like my current relationship is the closest to secure that I've ever been in. But
Mm.
the fear that I have from my like,
Mhm.
less healthy attachment styles,
Yeah.
it literally like it's like a siren in my head. I'm like, secure, boring, like abort, like pack your bag. Like it really, it gets me going a little bit. So
And so I mean, obviously for me, I do say I'm an anxious attacher more often than not. I confidently sometimes will be like, yeah, sometimes I'm anxious secure because I can be secure, but like no, the reality is like I pretend to be secure, and then in my pretending to be secure, it feels so inauthentic to my core that I become even hyper anxious. And now, based on today's learnings, I actually think I'm gonna, without doing the quiz, I'm gonna self-diagnose myself like everyone does in 2023 and say, I think I'm actually the disorganized, fearful avoidant, where you never know what you're gonna get. Because I don't even know what you're gonna get.
oh my god. Yeah, like so when we were talking earlier, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm anxious and avoidant. And I would say my pattern in relationships is I come in with this like stone cold face and like super confident and peacocky, and I'm just like, you know, I really make the person kind of work for my attention, and I feel like there's like definitely a power dynamic that I'll um maybe introduce, and that's the avoidance side. I'm like, I'm not going to let you get close to me. But then people that are persistent and like, well, chip down my walls, the second I like open up and show any sort of vulnerability, I'm like, don't leave me. Like I'm just like that. I'm like white knuckling, you know, I'm like so anxious. But that's always my cycle is like, I don't need you, and then I finally like let down my guard, and then I'm like,
I'm hooked.
I'm hooked, literally.
They say love is a drug. And I mean, I don't know the science behind all the chemicals released, but like they say like when people go through like recovery for addictions from various substances, they tell you not to date for a year after recovery because what happens is your brain can replace the substance you're losing with the new love interest. And that's not 100% of the time. I've seen people go through Alcoholics Anonymous and build healthy, strong relationships. I have seen people build terrible relationships that have ended messier than they started. But that's not a black or white answer, but it's just to say, like, yeah, there is something very real happening. Obviously, there's this chemical exchange and this
Oh yeah,
evolutionary thing that's like so bizarre. It's so bizarre. You know, why is it so complex?
it's a messy one.
It's gloriously messy. Hashtag on Twitter.
Hashtag
And so,
trending.
right. And so I want to take us in, like, so from knowing kind of a bit about your attachment style, like, how have you seen your attachment style? Like, you said a bit about your pattern, but like, take us into too many stories to share from your relationship journey.
Gosh.
Um,
Um, oh dear. Okay, I'll use my most current one because I feel like I could really go off on a tangent. But my most current relationship, so we actually met in high school. So this is
oh,
all very hilarious given my parents'
yeah.
history. Met in high school. He had a big crush on me, but I was dating someone else. We never dated. A couple years later, he reached out to me saying that he'd love to get together. We went on a couple dates. I moved to Vancouver. He moved to Korea, whatever. It's been this like, oh gosh, when was I in high school? It was like this like 10 plus year sort of saga of him
Wow.
pursuing me kind of like slow and steady over time. And when we first reconnected, more, I guess it was last year, um, I was not interested. Like, I was up on some sort of pedestal, and I just was like, sure, I'll hang out with you, you know, because I've just moved back home and like, who else am I gonna hang out with? But like, honestly, like, had no interest. And but like really enjoyed him as a person, and so like we would continue to hang out. And And over time, I feel like, my walls started coming down, coming down. And then when I really opened myself up to the possibility of being with him, it made me actually so emotional that this person, like, I think I actually felt guilty that, like, I could not see how beautiful this person had been. I, like,
Mhm.
had just been so avoidant of, like letting someone, like, fully see me. And I think this was the first time that I allowed, it was like the perfect combination, I guess, of timing,
Mhm.
like where I was at and where he was at. And
Mhm.
but it's been super messy and, like, strange for me. Like I said, um it's the closest thing that I've had to a secure attachment, but
Mhm.
I feel like he's, like, very stable and has, like, been like, I'm here, like, there's nothing you could say or do that's gonna, like, scare me away. So I almost find myself, like, testing the waters and being
Mhm.
like like, like, if I throw this, like, fit, like, how is he gonna react? Is he gonna stay? Or, like, oh gosh, like, we could get into more stories about, like, but, like, for me,
Mhm.
it's like, on one hand, I can totally see the, like, um, building a life together sort of thing. But then there's this other side of me that freaks out. And it's like, I see, versus, like, seeing building a life, I see, like,
Mhm.
settling down. And, like, the thought of, like, all these traditional things, like, gives
Yeah.
me so much anxiety. And I feel like when I think about those things, I start to, like, spiral and behave badly. So,
Mhm.
but I'd say we're really good at, like, communicating and figuring things out.
Yeah.
But I'll start there in terms of patterns.
Right? That pattern, and it, like, I mean, again, this is from one anxious attacher to another, but it sounds like you found a really good fit and match for where you're at. And I think that's what I always say too with where I'm at is I remember previous relationships where like we were both anxious attachers. And so what would happen is this pattern of, almost like emotional abuse and manipulation. It was just very toxic back and forth. And you always say like everyone has the potential to be toxic in somebody's version of them or story.
Yep.
And when we stay in something that's not good for us, we only have so much, I think, we only have so much goodness in us. And so when it's exhausted by being in something you shouldn't be in, I think your body is like, wait a minute, bitch. No, no. And so I've seen how tumultuous things have went up before. Whereas in this space now, I feel like I have met someone who is quite secure as well. So then in my madness, sometimes I can communicate out a wild story. And so I think I've told you this before, but I have created like characters. And I think it comes from that movie Inside Out. Where they're all, the movie Inside Out, where they're all like in the
Yeah,
brain,
it's like the only animated movie that I actually really like. Got
right?
a
And
couple other things, but it's great.
it flies by. And so I've created, so I have Anne. Anne is my anxiety. So Anne loves like attention and she just needs to be acknowledged. Like Anne hates to be like just told like ignored her. Like she's like, no, validate me, let me be, and I'll like let me do my thing and I'll be back. But like I always say she can't be like the main person. She's not allowed to be in control. But then more recently then I made mistrust. And
Oh,
yeah, yeah. And mistrust is like that part of me, like, I wish I could I woke up one morning and we had switched sides of the bed. And before bed, he was like, "Oh, can I sleep on that side tonight?" And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, yeah, no problem." Like, go to bed. I wake up in the morning. I kid you not, this is the story. He wanted to sleep on that side of the bed so that in the middle of the night he could wake up and go fuck someone. And I was like, "What the hell? What's that?" Like, I just woke up. I haven't had my coffee yet, but this is like the story that I created in my head. And so
and
in that
that's
moment, I was
mistrust.
able. That was Mr. House. Yeah, like she's like, "Bitch, you're awake. I've been waiting all night for you. Here's the story. Let's go." Like, ready to pick a fight. But and so I just said, I was like, can I tell you like the story that my brain just made? And it was like almost separating myself from the story itself. It's like that my brain is constantly going 100 different ways, and there's this part of me that will think these thoughts, but then by I've done it before where I've heard this crazy thought and then I've ignored it, and I find it like it gets louder. Whereas when I've been able to just openly say like, isn't this wild, then in that moment then I'm able to get affirmation. I think that's what I've
Mm.
sometimes in lacking when mistrust is most present, is like she just needs a bit more affirmation, and she's like trying to get it in a way that's in our control, because the reality is I can't control what he does or how he affirms me. But what I can communicate is my needs, and if I feel like I need to be affirmed, then I can say that. And so it was a really interesting, like, chaotic mistrust anxious moment of like what a story. I really need to write more stories.
Well, you and I, as artists, are great storytellers, which is a gift, but it can also really take us to some creative places in our relationships.
Yeah, fuck. I'm always like, why this? And so like, I mean, yeah, I want to know, do you want to go deeper, or do you, I'm thinking maybe we should like, based on our experience, if someone's listening to this and they're like, what are some tips they have for recognizing that we're fucking this up as we go? I mean, let me speak for myself.
You
But
can
like,
speak.
yeah. But like, yeah, I don't know. Is there any like lessons learned or things that you would share or tell other people who are listening?
Oh, okay, maybe we'll do like a back and forth on this so that I can
I
like,
love it.
and we'll
Yeah.
we'll jam off each other. But um I think one thing, and it sounds so simple, but like your reality, while it's important to acknowledge all the feelings that are coming up and whatever, but because we're a collection of all of our experiences, like how we see
Mhm.
a scenario is our own, like, it's our own sort of weaving of a story and like how we want to see something. So like I
Mhm.
think for me sometimes it's really helpful to like take a step back and being like, okay, what is actually fact and truth? Like
Mhm.
not necessarily my truth or like what emotions are coming, like that's important, but like separating actual facts of what's happening
Mhm.
and then understanding like how what I'm seeing could
Mhm.
be maybe a little bit of a remix,
Mhm.
just based on like how I'm choosing to see it based on my experiences.
Mhm. I love that. Fact check. So tip number one,
Check.
fact check yourself, because yeah, the reality is sometimes those realities, the versions you create, like they can feel so real. You know, if you have a weird dream, like it can feel so authentic, and that's because like it is a real feeling, but because it's a feeling doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And that's like I think a game changer. I think my biggest thing is like tell on yourself, like 110%. There was like I was like really playing into mistrust and creating some like scenarios in my head, and then validating it by like checking on like my partner's location and like where are
Mm.
they. And then like, oh, they're here, so this is happening. And then what I started to do is I was like, no, I had to start telling on myself. And at first I didn't actually tell it to my partner, but I said it to one of my close friends. And then when I was able to say it to him, then I was able to kind of be validated from that place, and then I would take actions from there of like I don't know, that part of me was like validated, and then I was able to move forward and stop the behavior. I also turned off Find My. I don't think you should have like location on your partners. I don't know, unless you're someone who's very secure and both people like it's not for me. I do not need to have it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like that's your version of maybe my next tip is because relationships are a mirror of ourselves, when I
Mm,
start spiraling around like they're doing this or they're not doing this or like whatever like drama I'm creating about them and their
mm,
behavior, I stop and I'm like, okay, what is it that I'm actually feeling like I'm lacking, or like what is this actually telling me about me and what I
Mhm.
need? And then having healthy communication to express like I'm feeling XYZ versus saying like you did this. Like I think if I can make our conversations about relationship, about how I'm feeling versus their
Mhm.
actions and words, it's actually
Mhm.
way more productive and actually like probably truer to the essence of like what's actually going on. You know, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
detective work.
Yeah. I love that. And I think I'm going to follow yours up with a beautiful tip number 4. Know your patterns, like do your work, because you have to, like, I mean, if you don't like traditional therapist, I mean, I would be hesitant to go to some friends. At least for me, I'm like, some of you are toxic, so I can't go to them about it. But generally speaking, like, if you know your patterns, you're better able to respond in the heat of the moment, because, like, these beautiful reptilian brains that we've evolved to have, like, when they're activated and they go into survival mode and we're triggered, we're really going back to like the origin of that place. We're not in the moment. And so we have to find a way to, one of my therapists one time told me to, like, you have to change the channel. Like,
Mm,
and so in those moments when you're aware of your patterning, yeah, you can then better interrupt the frequency or disrupt
right.
and change the channel. And you bring back that conscious part to it. And it only comes from actually sitting and doing the work, and like, God, I know it's simple, but journaling and just being real, like, oh wow, I really fucked that one up, hey? And having that level of self-criticism, but on the flip end of that, also self-affirmation, and
Hmm.
balancing the two, because there's people, we can be hypercritical of ourselves, and we have to remember to also affirm that part of ourselves, like, hey, that part of me is valid, and it makes sense based on what I've been through, what I've seen, what I've experienced. But who I want to be is this person, and so how do I walk in alignment with that person?
Yeah, like adding shame onto your flaws is not going to make it any better. So,
Mm.
um, give her some love, give Anne and Mistrust some love, but then help
Yes.
out, like you said.
Yeah. And you have to do both, and you're always, like, again, going through that cyclical flow of relationships and relationship to self, like, you're always going through that journey, and sometimes you're going through that journey multiple times in a day. Sometimes it's prolonged, like, the whole concept of time is so, we've built like a whole world on this time clock that we live on that happens
Can we
to
get
go forward for no reason. Why does it go forward? Why did the time go forward? I don't know. But anyway, we have these concepts of time, but yeah, that time is beyond us. It's beyond, any of us, that how those journeys and how those things play out. But yeah. I don't know. Do you have any other tips you wanted to give before we wrap
oh,
things up?
mm, hmm. I don't think so. I mean, we didn't claim to be experts. I'm sure I could think of some and add them to the notes, but for today, that's all she wrote.
I hope that the message is here, that there's something for everyone listening, for you, and on your journey. And I always say, like, sometimes I hear things and I'm like, yeah, that wasn't for me. But then, like, 3 days later, I'm like having a conversation and I'm like, oh my God, this is for you. And like, we're the messenger in other people's stories. It's, yeah, it's phenomenal. We're so interconnected. It's wild to me when we become conscious of it.
And you and I love talking about mess and relationships. So like if any of the people listening, um, if there's like anything in here that like sparks another discussion, like I feel like you and I both would love to, dive deeper into those like sub topics that we've talked about.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. And thank you for being the premier human to bring this magical conversation to life. I have so much love and appreciation for you.
Love you so much.
And yeah, with that, that concludes our episode. There's going to be a whole new episode coming very soon on a whole new topic, which is TBD because I haven't decided yet. But I hope everyone listening keep being glorious, keep being messy, and keep living your best damn life and finding ways to love yourself. I appreciate you all. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.